Dessy Carter tightened her grip on the leather portfolio pressed against her chest as she reached for the front door. The deadbolt clicked. Her father had locked it. "No one's leaving," Harold Carter said, planting himself in front of the door with his arms folded. "Dad, what are you doing?" Dessy asked, glancing at the clock. "My interview starts in less than an hour." Before he could answer, an SUV rolled into the driveway. Her older brother, Ryan, climbed out smiling as though it were any other Saturday. His 2 children jumped out behind him, laughing while carrying toys. Ryan opened the front door without knocking, dropped 2 stuffed backpacks onto the hardwood floor, and looked directly at her. "Dad said you're watching the kids." Dessy blinked. "What?" "My barbecue starts at noon," Ryan said casually. "Everyone's already coming over." She stared from Ryan to her father. "You know, today is my final interview." Her mother walked into the hallway, carrying a bowl of potato salad. Without even looking up, she laughed. "Girls like you don't get dreams," Diane said. "You get responsibilities." Dessy's stomach dropped. This interview could change my entire life. Ryan shrugged. "My barbecue matters too." "No," Dessy said quietly. "It doesn't." The room fell silent. For the first time in years, she had challenged him. Her father's expression hardened. "You will stay here." Ryan nudged one of the backpacks toward her feet. The children were already taking off their shoes. Outside, more cars began pulling into the driveway. Inside the house she had grown up believing was home. Dessy realized her family had never intended to let her leave. And in that moment, she understood something that would change the rest of her life. They hadn't forgot about her interview. They had planned this because of it. She slowly lowered her portfolio toward the floor, but instead of setting it down, she tightened her grip around it. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Ryan looked annoyed. Harold stood firmly in front of the front door, as if the conversation were over. Diane returned to arranging food on the dining table, humming to herself, while relatives' cars continued filling the driveway outside. The smell of charcoal drifted in through the open kitchen window. Everything about the morning had been carefully prepared. Everything except her future. Dessy swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "I spent 2 years preparing for this interview," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I worked nights. I studied every weekend. I turned down vacations. I earned this opportunity." Her father didn't move. "You earned the privilege of helping your family." Ryan chuckled as he opened one of the coolers. "Stop making this dramatic. It's just one interview." "It isn't just one interview." "It is to us," Diane answered. "Family comes first." Dessy looked around the room. Not one face showed concern. Not one person asked what the interview was for. Not one person wished her luck. To them, Ryan's afternoon barbecue deserved more respect than everything she had worked toward for years. The realization hurt more than the locked door. Ryan's oldest son tugged at her sleeve. "Aunt Dessy, are we watching movies today?" She looked down at the little boy and managed a small smile. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." She gently moved his backpack aside with her foot. Then she turned away from the front hallway. Without asking permission. Without arguing another word. She walked through the kitchen. Past the trays of uncooked burgers. Past her mother, arranging desserts. Past the sliding glass door. Harold shouted after her. "Dessy." She didn't stop. She opened the back door. Stepped into the cool morning air. Walked through the backyard. Climbed over the low wooden gate. And disappeared without looking back once. Behind her, voices erupted. Someone shouted her name. Someone else complained about the children. But the farther she walked, the quieter those voices became. She reached her neighbor's driveway, pulled out her phone with shaking hands, and requested the first rideshare she could find. As she watched the arrival time countdown, One thought echoed through her mind. If she made this interview, she would never come back. 8 years later, Ryan Carter adjusted his tie as he stepped into the gleaming headquarters of one of the fastest-growing companies in the country. After losing his previous management position, this interview represented his last real chance to rebuild his career. A receptionist welcomed him with a warm smile and directed him toward the executive interview suite. Ryan straightened his jacket, took a deep breath, and walked toward the conference room, completely unaware of who was about to open the door. Ryan Carter sat alone outside the executive conference room, one polished dress shoe tapping nervously against the floor. The company's headquarters felt nothing like the places he had worked before. Employees greeted each other by name. Managers carried their own laptops instead of handing them to assistants. Nobody raised their voice. Everything moved with quiet precision. Ryan checked his reflection in the glass wall and loosened his tie. "Come on," he muttered to himself. "You've done management interviews before." Across the hall, a digital display scrolled through the company's values. Integrity, accountability, opportunity earned. Ryan barely noticed. Instead, his thoughts drifted to the salary, the executive benefits, and how impressed his parents would be if he landed the position. As he waited, his mind wandered back to the day everything changed. 8 years earlier, Dessy hurried down a quiet residential street, her heels striking the pavement as she clutched her portfolio against her chest. She glanced over her shoulder. No one was following. Her phone vibrated. Dad calling. She ignored it. Another call came immediately. Mom calling. She silenced that one too. Her rideshare finally pulled to the curb. The driver lowered the passenger window. "Dessy." "Yes." "You look like you've been running." "I have." She climbed inside, trying to steady her breathing. "Downtown Innovation Center, please." The driver nodded and pulled away. Only then did she realize her car keys were still hanging on the hook inside her parents' kitchen. She laughed bitterly. They really thought of everything. The driver glanced at her through the mirror. "Big day." "The biggest." He didn't ask another question. Instead, he pressed the accelerator a little harder. Traffic crawled. Every red light felt personal. Dessy kept checking the clock until she finally stopped. If she kept staring at the time, she would only panic. She closed her eyes, reviewed her notes from memory, repeated the presentation she had practiced hundreds of times. By the time they reached the downtown office tower, she was 12 minutes late. She sprinted through the lobby. The receptionist looked up. "You must be Dessy Carter." "I'm so sorry I'm late. The interview panel is still waiting." "They didn't cancel." The receptionist smiled. "They asked us to bring you upstairs as soon as you arrived." Dessy exhaled for what felt like the first time all morning. An elevator carried her to the top floor. The assistant outside the boardroom opened the door. "Ms. Carter has arrived." 5 interviewers looked toward her. She stood in the doorway, breathing hard. "I'm very sorry for being late." The chairperson gestured toward an empty seat. "Please have a seat." Dessy remained standing. "I'd like to explain first." The panel exchanged curious looks. She could have blamed traffic. She could have invented a flat tire. Instead, she told them the truth. "My family deliberately tried to prevent me from attending today." Silence settled over the room. She continued. "My father blocked the front door. My parents kept my car keys. My brother expected me to babysit his children because they believed his barbecue was more important than this interview." No one interrupted. "I almost turned around because I thought arriving late meant I'd already failed. But I realized if I didn't come," she said, taking a slow breath, "I would spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd chosen myself for once." The chairperson leaned back. "Ms. Carter." She braced herself. Thank you for being honest. Another interviewer smiled. Now let's talk about why you're actually here. The interview lasted nearly 2 hours. Every question sharpened her confidence. Every answer reminded her why she had worked so hard. She stopped thinking about the barbecue, stopped thinking about the locked door, stopped thinking about pleasing people who had never intended to let her succeed. For the first time in her life, she was being evaluated solely on her ability. 3 days later, an email arrived. Congratulations. We are pleased to offer you a position in our Executive Leadership Development Program. Dessy stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then she quietly closed her laptop. There was no one to call. No family member who would celebrate. Her phone buzzed. Mom calling. She let it ring. A voicemail arrived minutes later. Dessy, where have you been? Your brother's barbecue was a disaster. We had to leave early because nobody would watch the kids. Call us immediately. Another voicemail followed from Ryan. I hope whatever stupid interview you went to was worth ruining the entire day. Not one message asked whether she got the job. Not one person wondered how she was doing. Within a week, Dessy signed the lease on a tiny studio apartment across town. It had mismatched cabinets, a leaking faucet, barely enough room for a bed and a folding table. But every inch of it belonged to her. She worked during the day, studied leadership and operations at night, collected certifications whenever she could afford them. Promotions came slowly, then faster. Meanwhile, birthdays came and went. Thanksgiving invitations never arrived. Christmas passed in silence. Months later, her mother finally sent a text. Can you watch Ryan's kids next Saturday? Nothing else. No greeting. No apology. Dessy looked at the message for several seconds before deleting it. Over the years, the pattern never changed. Whenever her phone lit up with a family member's name, the conversation always ended the same way. They needed money. A favor. Childcare. Advice. A ride. They never asked how she was. One rainy evening, after another ignored voicemail from Ryan asking her to co-sign a loan, Dessy sat alone in her apartment, looking out the window. She whispered words she had avoided admitting for years. They don't miss me. She paused. They miss what I did for them. The truth hurt, but it also set her free. 8 years later, outside the executive conference room, Ryan straightened his resume as the receptionist approached with a polite smile. The executive conducting your final interview has just arrived. Ryan stood confidently. The conference room door slowly swung open, and the first person he saw made every ounce of confidence disappear. Ryan's smile vanished. For a full second, he thought he had walked into the wrong room. Behind the long conference table sat 3 executives. The woman in the center looked up from a folder. She wore a charcoal business suit, a silver company badge, and the calm expression of someone completely in control. Her nameplate read, Dessy Carter, Senior Vice President, Operations Strategy. Ryan's fingers loosened around his resume. Oh, Dessy. She met his eyes. Good morning, Mr. Carter. Her voice was professional, measured, almost unfamiliar. Ryan looked around the room, then back at her. You work here. I do. One of the other executives gestured toward the empty chair. Please have a seat. Ryan forced a laugh. What are the odds? No one responded. He slowly sat down. Dessy opened his application folder. We'll begin with a few questions about your leadership experience. Her tone never changed. Not once did she acknowledge that he was her brother. Ryan shifted in his chair. Before we start, he said with another nervous chuckle, it's been a long time. Dessy looked up briefly. This interview is being conducted according to company policy. Will remain focused on the position. The other interviewers nodded. Ryan cleared his throat. Right. The interview began. One executive asked about managing organizational change. Ryan answered confidently, but vaguely. Dessy followed with a simple question. Can you describe a specific project where you personally led a cross-functional team through measurable operational improvements? Ryan hesitated. I've supported projects like that. Supported, Dessy repeated. Were you responsible for the outcome? I was involved. Can you explain your role? Ryan stumbled through the answer. The panel made notes. Another executive asked how he handled employee conflict. Ryan offered broad management cliches. Dessy asked for a real example. Again, he struggled. As the interview continued, his confidence slowly unraveled. Every answer that sounded impressive at first became weaker when the panel requested details. Then frustration replaced caution. Ryan leaned back in his chair. You know, he said, forcing a grin, it's kind of funny that we're pretending not to know each other. The room fell silent. Dessy closed her notebook. This interview evaluates professional qualifications. Oh, come on. Ryan laughed louder. We're family. No one else smiled. You remember that barbecue, Ryan continued. Dad still jokes about it. One executive glanced toward Dessy. Another stopped writing. Ryan shook his head. It was 8 years ago. We were all younger. Families fight. Dessy's expression never changed. Do you have anything further to add regarding your management experience? Ryan blinked. Seriously. We're here to discuss the position. He stared at her. You've got to be kidding. I've asked a question. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Ryan looked around the table. No one appeared uncomfortable except him. For the first time in years, his family connection carried absolutely no weight. He finished the interview with short, unfocused answers. When it ended, the panel thanked him politely. Nothing more. Outside the conference room, Ryan pulled out his phone before the elevator doors even opened. His father answered immediately. How'd it go? Ryan lowered his voice. You won't believe who's running this department. Who? Dessy. Silence. Then Diane's voice came through the speaker. What? She's some executive here. Harold scoffed. That's impossible. I'm telling you, she's interviewing people. His mother's tone sharpened. Stay there. Within 2 hours, Harold and Diane Carter marched through the company's glass entrance. The receptionist stood. Good afternoon, may I help you? We're here to see our daughter, Harold announced loudly. Several employees looked up from nearby workstations. The receptionist smiled politely. Do you have an appointment? I don't need an appointment to see my own daughter. Ryan pointed toward the executive floor. She's senior vice president. The receptionist's expression changed slightly. I'll contact her office. Minutes later, Dessy stepped out of the elevator. She didn't rush. She didn't look surprised. She simply walked across the lobby. Harold pointed at her the moment she approached. There you are. Employees nearby instinctively slowed their conversations. Ryan folded his arms. You embarrass me in there. Dessy looked at him calmly. The interview has concluded. You could have helped him, Diane snapped. He's your brother. You owe your family. A few visitors waiting in the lobby exchanged uneasy glances. Harold's voice grew louder. You always were selfish. Ryan nodded toward the elevators. One recommendation from you, and this whole thing is solved. Dessy remained perfectly composed. I can't do that. You won't do that, Diane corrected. There's a difference. Harold shook his head. After everything we've done for you, Dessy looked at each of them in turn. Then, instead of arguing in front of dozens of employees, she spoke quietly. "Come with me." Ryan frowned. "What? If you truly want to talk." She turned toward the elevators. "Let's do it somewhere private." A few minutes later, the four of them entered a quiet executive conference room. Dessy closed the door behind them. No assistants. No audience. No interruptions. She walked to a cabinet along the wall, opened the bottom drawer, removed an old brown leather portfolio. The edges were worn. One corner was permanently scuffed. She placed it gently in the center of the conference table. None of them spoke. Dessy rested one hand on the faded leather. Then she looked directly at her parents. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Do either of you remember this?" Silence answered first. The silence stretched across the conference room. Harold glanced at the worn leather portfolio. Diane looked away first. Ryan frowned, clearly unsure why an old folder mattered. Finally, Harold shrugged. "It's just a portfolio." Dessy nodded once. "It is." She ran her fingers over the deep scrape across one corner. "I bought it with money from my first internship." No one responded. "I carried it the day of my final interview." She looked directly at her father. "The day you locked the front door." Harold exhaled sharply. "We've already been through this." "No," Dessy replied. "We haven't." She slowly opened the portfolio. Inside were neatly organized documents. Interview notes. Certificates. A faded visitor badge from 8 years earlier. Everything had been carefully preserved. Ryan shifted in his chair. "Dessy." She ignored him. Instead, she reached into another folder lying beside her. "I asked you a question." Her mother crossed her arms. "It was 8 years ago. Do you remember it?" Diane finally answered. "I remember you overreacting." Dessy didn't argue. She simply slid several printed pages across the table. "I'd like you to read these." Harold frowned. "What is this?" "Text messages." Ryan leaned forward. Dessy folded her hands. "I recovered them from an old phone while transferring archived data last year." Harold's expression changed almost immediately. Ryan reached for the pages before either parent could. The first message was dated the evening before the barbecue. "Ryan, make sure she doesn't leave tomorrow. If she goes to that interview, she'll stop doing everything around here." Ryan's face tightened. He kept reading. Another message. "Diane, don't worry. She'll do what she's told. She always does." Another. "Harold, will keep her busy until your guests arrive." The room became painfully quiet. Ryan looked up. I don't remember sending these." Dessy's voice remained even. "They're time-stamped." Harold pushed the papers away. "So what?" Dessy looked at him. "So you planned it. It was a family event." "No." She shook her head. "It was sabotage." Harold laughed dismissively. "You're making this bigger than it was." "Am I?" She reached for another folder. This wasn't the only time. Ryan stared at her. "What do you mean?" Dessy slid several printed emails across the table. "I requested copies during a financial records review earlier this year." Ryan looked confused. "What financial review?" "When I settled Grandma Leaner's estate." She watched their reactions carefully. The attorney included archived family correspondence because several documents referenced me. Ryan picked up the pages. The first email was from nearly 10 years earlier. His eyes moved slowly across the screen. Then he stopped. "Dad." Harold remained silent. Ryan read aloud. "Dessy's scholarship interview is Saturday morning. Tell Aunt Linda will arrive after lunch because we need her helping set up. Ryan looked at another email. Then another. A leadership conference. A graduate networking event. A certification workshop. Every important opportunity carried the same pattern. Another family obligation. Another reason she had been expected to stay behind. Another excuse for Ryan to move ahead while she stayed in place. Ryan lowered the papers. I never knew about these. Harold finally spoke. It wasn't your concern. Dessy's eyes never left him. It became my concern every single time. Diane sighed impatiently. You weren't being punished. No. You were helping your family. Dessy nodded slowly. So let's talk about that. She stood and walked toward the window overlooking the city. Without turning around, she asked quietly, why was Ryan never expected to help me? No one answered. She turned back. Why wasn't he told to skip football camp so I could attend an academic conference? Silence. Why wasn't he asked to miss job interviews so he could babysit my future children? Ryan looked down. Still no answer. Dessy's voice remained calm. Why was every sacrifice always mine? Diane finally spoke. Because Ryan is your brother. Dessy waited. And Harold finished the sentence. He was going to carry on the Carter name. The words hung in the room. Ryan slowly lifted his head. Dad. Harold didn't stop. We invested where it mattered. Ryan's expression changed. What does that mean? His father looked genuinely confused. It means you had more responsibility. Dessy shook her head. No. She looked directly at Ryan. It means they decided your future mattered more than mine. Ryan stared at the old emails scattered across the conference table. Memories he had never questioned suddenly fit together. The scholarship he celebrated. The internship Dessy never mentioned. The workshops she supposedly didn't want to attend. He had believed she simply wasn't interested. Now he realized. She had never been given the chance. Ryan slowly sat back. My entire life. He swallowed hard. I thought you just didn't care about those opportunities. Dessy gave a sad smile. I cared. She paused. I just wasn't allowed to choose them. The room fell silent again. This time, even Harold had nothing to say. After several long moments, Dessy gathered the papers into neat stacks. She closed the old portfolio. Then she looked at Ryan. This interview isn't about punishment. He met her eyes. It's about qualifications. She turned toward the conference room door. I've already informed Human Resources that I have a personal relationship with one of the finalists. Ryan frowned. What? I formally removed myself from the final hearing decision. Harold looked stunned. You did what? I won't participate in the committee's vote. Ryan blinked. You mean? I won't help you. She paused. But I also won't hurt you. She opened the conference room door. The hearing committee will evaluate every finalist without my involvement. Harold stepped forward. Dessy, wait. She stopped but didn't turn around. The decision now belongs to people who owe none of us anything. Ryan looked toward the hallway where members of Human Resources were already gathering outside another meeting room. The hearing committee was assembling. One by one, senior executives entered. The conference room door closed behind them. Ryan stood in the hallway, staring at the frosted glass. For the first time in his life, nothing his parents said, nothing his last name carried, and nothing his sister could do would determine what happened next. Only the committee's decision would. Ryan remained outside the executive conference room, staring at the closed door. For years, waiting had always belonged to someone else. Teachers had waited for him to finish assignments. Managers had waited for him to improve. His parents had always found someone to smooth over his mistakes. Today, no one was coming to rescue him. Inside the conference room, the hearing committee reviewed every finalist using the same evaluation matrix. Leadership experience, operational knowledge, strategic decision-making, communication, documented achievements. Each category received an independent score. Dessy wasn't in the room. Just as she had promised, she sat quietly in her office down the hall, reviewing quarterly reports while human resources handled the process exactly according to company policy. Nearly an hour later, the committee door opened. The human resources director stepped into the hallway. "Mr. Carter." Ryan stood immediately. "Yes. We've reached a decision." His parents moved closer. The director offered a professional smile. "Thank you for taking the time to interview with us." Ryan knew what those words meant before she continued. "After carefully reviewing all candidates, we've selected another applicant whose experience and leadership record more closely match the requirements of the position." No dramatic pause. No humiliation. Just a fair decision. Ryan lowered his head. "I understand." The director handed him a folder. "Your interview scores and feedback are included. We encourage you to apply again after gaining additional experience." She shook his hand. "Thank you for your professionalism." Then she walked away. Harold immediately rounded on Dessy as she approached from the executive offices. "This is your fault." Employees passing through the lobby slowed instinctively. "You poisoned them against your own brother." Dessy remained calm. "I wasn't part of the decision. You expect us to believe that." "I don't expect anything." She turned toward the human resources director, who happened to be returning through the lobby. "Would you mind clarifying something?" The director nodded. "Of course." Harold folded his arms. "Did my daughter influence this hearing decision?" The director answered without hesitation. "No." She looked directly at Harold. Ms. Carter disclosed the family relationship before the interview concluded. Harold's expression faltered. The director continued. "She voluntarily recused herself from all evaluation, discussion, scoring, and voting regarding Mr. Carter's application." Ryan looked at Dessy. "You really did?" She nodded once. "I told you I would." The director added one final sentence. "Our hearing decision was unanimous." Then she excused herself. Harold had nothing left to argue. For the first time, blaming Dessy simply didn't work. Ryan slowly opened the feedback folder. There were pages of detailed notes. Areas where he lacked measurable leadership experience. Examples where his answers remained too general. Suggestions for future development. No mention of family. No mention of Dessy. Just facts. He quietly closed the folder. "I wasn't ready." No one answered. Outside the building, Diane broke the silence. She could have made one phone call. Ryan surprised everyone. "No." His mother stared at him. "What?" He looked at the office tower. If she had done that. He held up the feedback packet. "I would have gotten another job I didn't earn." Harold frowned. "She's your sister." Ryan laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "And that's exactly why she stepped away." For several seconds, none of them spoke. The drive home was almost silent. Over the next few weeks, Ryan told relatives what had happened. At first, he complained that Dessy had interviewed him. But every conversation eventually reached the same question. Why did she leave home 8 years ago? Ryan repeated the story. Then one aunt asked quietly, did anyone ever ask why she was willing to leave her entire family behind? No one had. Another relative contacted Dessy. Then another. They weren't looking for gossip. They wanted answers. When Dessy agreed to meet several close family members, she brought one thing with her: the old leather portfolio. She laid it on the dining table, exactly as she had in the conference room. Then she placed copies of the recovered text messages beside it. No raised voice. No accusations. Just evidence. One by one, relatives read the messages. Ryan watched their expressions change. His aunt wiped tears from her eyes. "I thought you stopped coming because you became successful." Dessy shook her head gently. "I stopped coming because every dream I had became someone else's inconvenience." Another uncle stared at Harold. "You really planned that?" Harold couldn't answer. Someone else picked up the printed emails documenting years of conflicts that had mysteriously appeared whenever Dessy earned a new opportunity. Scholarship interview. Networking conference. Leadership workshop. Always another family obligation. Always another sacrifice. The room grew painfully quiet. An older cousin finally spoke. "We all saw Ryan getting opportunities." She looked at Dessy. "I never realized they came at your expense." For the first time in years, Harold and Diane found themselves unable to control the conversation. No one argued. No one defended them. Because the evidence spoke louder than explanations ever could. Over the following months, family gatherings changed. Relatives stopped assuming Harold and Diane's version of events was the truth. Several apologized privately to Dessy. Not because she had become a successful executive. Because they realized they had mistaken obedience for love and sacrifice for duty. Harold and Diane discovered something they had never expected. Authority disappears quickly once trust is gone. People no longer accepted their stories without asking questions. People no longer pressured Dessy to be the bigger person. For the first time, accountability reached the people who had demanded it from everyone else. Several months later, Ryan called Dessy. She answered after the second ring. "Hello." There was a long pause. "I don't need a favor," he said quietly. "I know. I don't need a recommendation." "I know." Another silence. Then Ryan took a deep breath. "I'm sorry." Dessy said nothing. "I spent years believing Mom and Dad when they said everything always worked out because I deserved it." His voice cracked. "I never asked what you had to give up." Dessy leaned back in her chair. "You were a kid when it started." "I wasn't a kid forever." "No. I should have noticed." "You should have." Neither of them rushed to fill the silence. Finally, Ryan spoke again. "I've accepted an entry-level operations position with another company." Dessy smiled faintly. "Congratulations." "It isn't glamorous." "It doesn't have to be." "I earned it." She closed her eyes for a moment. "I'm glad." They ended the call without pretending the past had disappeared. Some wounds heal. Some simply stop bleeding. Months turned into years. Ryan slowly built a career on his own effort. He learned from supervisors instead of expecting special treatment. He earned promotions, one performance review at a time. Meanwhile, Dessy continued leading the operations strategy division she had helped build from the ground up. One afternoon, a young analyst knocked on her office door. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course." The employee looked nervous. "My parents think I should decline the leadership program." Dessy smiled knowingly. "Why?" "They say I should stay close to home because my family needs me." Dessy walked to the office window, overlooking the city. The same skyline she had first seen after escaping through the back gate 8 years earlier. She turned back toward the analyst. "Let me tell you something I learned the hard way." The young employee listened carefully. "The people who truly love your future will never ask you to sacrifice it for their convenience." The analyst nodded slowly. "Thank you." After the door closed, Dessy looked at the old leather portfolio resting on the bookshelf behind her desk. She had kept it all these years, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as proof of the morning she finally chose herself. Because the back door she walked through that day had never been an escape. It had been an entrance into a life she built through courage, integrity, and hard-earned opportunity. And no one would ever lock that door again.